Good afternoon, everybody. This is Sarah Richmond. I'm the head of marketing here at Above the Tree Line, the company that makes Edelweiss. But I'm not the one who's going to be presenting today. I'm actually going to be monitoring the Q&A, though. We do have the lines muted. And so if you have questions for our presenters today or something that we haven't covered, you want to know more detail, put that into the Q&A or to the chat. I'll grab a hold of that. Some of them we might address today. Some of them we might get back to you personally after the session too. So definitely feel free to put those questions in there. But I'm going to pass it over to our presenters. We have on the phone John Rubin, who's our founder and CEO, and Joe Upton, who's our VP of Business Development. And between the two of them, they have talked to a lot of publishers already about print review copies, which, as you know, are pretty new for us, and have a good feel for sort of the frequently asked questions that folks have had so far. And so that's what we have in our slide deck today, but to guarantee there'll be something that we forget to cover or that you think of. And so definitely let us know. That's our goal today, is really to answer everybody's questions. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to, I think, Joe. Are you starting us out?
Yes, thank you, Sarah. So Sarah said, I'm Joe Upton. And she also said, we are really excited to be talking to you about print review copies. We started this endeavor has been on the drawing board for a few years, but we really dug into it in earnest last spring. And what's been really exciting about the process is we've talked to booksellers and to publishers. It's nearly universal excitement about the ability, the potential opportunity to order print review copies through Edelweiss. So we have officially launched it, and I'm going to kind of review the print review copies in the context of review copies. So the review copies are not new to Edelweiss. Publishers have used Edelweiss to manage their complete digital review copy programs for a few years now. And in addition to providing a simple mechanism for reaching influencers on their own, using their own contact lists and through social media, publishers can also reach over 100,000 book professionals on Edelweiss. So while it's hard to measure the true impact of review copies for a publisher, there's a good reason why they've been used so pervasively, and that's because they work. About $1 invested in review copies translates to $5 or more in sales. It's particularly efficient to manage review copies in Edelweiss because marketing and sales teams are already using the tool, and so are the book professionals on the other end of the supply chain. And you can easily integrate review copies into the sales process by sending them to buyers and including them in catalog markups. The process is also highly customizable and it's affordable, which makes it pretty popular. And in fact, what's interesting for Edelweiss is that the top 10 publishers, as measured by revenue, use Edelweiss to manage their current digital review copy programs. And we recently did a webinar with a couple of panelists from Norton and HarperCollins, where they talked about how they use digital review copies to promote their new titles. So if you're interested in listening to that, please check out our webinars page on Edelweiss. So advanced reader copies, or ARCs, have long been an integral component of the sales and marketing process for publishers. And for purposes of differentiating ARCs from digital review copies in Edelweiss, we refer to them as print review copies, or PRCs. And managing ARCs efficiently and effectively has always been a challenge for publishers. It's certainly something we heard as we were talking to publishers last summer. You can end up with hundreds of extra print review copies because you overestimated how many you'd need, or conversely, you run out of books too soon. And we've heard for years from publishers who would like to manage their print review copies in the same place as their digital review copies. So as I mentioned a minute ago, we're really excited to be adding this service into the review copy module alongside digital review copies. As I mentioned, we did some research in the fall to make sure we understood the challenge facing publishers, and particularly when it comes to print review copies. And so, because we really wanted to understand the pain and come up with a solution to that particular pain. So, and some of you actually may have taken the survey. Not surprisingly, cost was reported to be the biggest challenge. but close to it was reducing waste. In fact, the vast majority of publisher respondents estimated that they ended up throwing out at least 10% of their print review copies. And 30 to 40% said they, or 30 to 40% waste was not uncommon. So in some instances, more than that.
Yeah, and I'll just add too, one of the interesting things was that while there were these commonalities, the publishers do look at it in different ways than each other. So even though these sort of look like they're even, we definitely found across sort of the big houses, the smaller houses, some people who getting it to the right people was their issue, and others it was all about cost. So it was just kind of interesting that there were common themes, but people definitely had their own take on review copies.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think while cost and waste were kind of very consistent throughout, a reoccurring theme was this idea that, well, even if we don't save any money, if it doesn't cost anymore and we can get books into the right hands, it's a winner. What are print review copies in Edelweiss? Well, think of Edelweiss as an ordering platform that connects to your print fulfillment provider. And for our initial launch of PRCs in Edelweiss, we're teaming up with Lightning Source in a kind of a POD supply model. But you can tie into any provider you want, and you can even tie it into your back office. But it's just important to think of Edelweiss is the ordering platform. That's where you go in, whether it's you, your sales reps, people at accounts or reviewers that you permit to order copies, but they place the order. The order is then routed to a print fulfillment provider and delivered to wherever it was supposed to be sent to. And as mentioned, you can limit the process to just having your publicity team and your sales reps send PRCs directly to individuals, or you can allow designated buyers and reviewers to order PRCs for themselves.
But that is a distinction from, if you're familiar with the digital review copies, where it's much more, you put them out for anybody who's on Edelweiss to make a request. And we've specifically made it for the print review copies because there's obviously a higher cost than the digital. You can do that, but our going in assumption in the tools that you'll see is that you have to explicitly grant folks access for them to be able to request.
Right. So, what this means for your sales and marketing teams is, and for your organization, is that you're minimizing inventory and you're shipping directly to the end user. And it allows the sales reps to just have, to maintain the inventory, so to speak, if they want to have books shipped to their office, just what they need. And so it simplifies the process, it eliminates clutter, it eliminates double shipping and handling, and you never miss an opportunity to share a book with an influencer. And, the key benefits, it reduces costs by 20 to 50%, and we'll elaborate on that in a couple of slides later. You reduce waste, you simplify the process significantly, and you're reaching the buyers and influencers you want to reach with ease. So here's a look at how this plays out for publishers. Usually publishers find themselves managing their print review copies based on supply. This means reps request PRCs early in the season, months in advance of when they are produced, and then distribute them based on supply. They bring review copies to sales calls or send them afterwards to interested accounts. However, that often means they miss opportunities to reach interested constituents in a timely fashion, and it results in high waste and handling costs. Managing PRCs in Edelweiss allows you to work in a demand model, which means reps and accounts request PRCs as needed to be delivered directly to interested parties. And when reps or even their accounts can request books directly, as I mentioned before. And as stated in the previous slide, you see a dramatic reduction in waste, smaller inventories, a more efficient process, and I think a real critical element is you're getting your books into the hands of the people who can drive sales. So in other words, it's really about moving to a just-in-time model and improving efficiency across the process. And the economics are pretty clear. I mentioned earlier that we believe, and this is based on that survey we referenced earlier, the cost savings can be as much as 20 to 50%. And in the chart you're looking at on the screen, we're comparing a process that's often used. It's a double handling process with the Edelweiss model. And in that typical process, you're printing a few hundred copies, maybe even up to a couple thousand copies of an advanced reader copy. It's being shipped to one central point. That could be a warehouse, it could be your back office. Those books are then bundled and shipped out to the reps. The reps either one by one put them in envelopes and send them to their accounts, or they put them in their car and hand deliver them to the accounts, or, and it's not uncommon, they put them in their car and they hand deliver them to a recycling center. In the Edelweiss model, you're printing, in the current model that we're deploying with, it's a print-on-demand model, so the unit cost for printing is higher, but you're only handling the books once, they're only being shipped once, and then there's a small service fee to Treeline for managing the process. And before I hand it off to John, I'll just say, I've said a couple times, in the current iteration of the process, it's a print-on-demand model. But if we go back to the fact that this is an ordering platform, we've designed it so it can be plugged into to any fulfillment model or supplier. So if you're thinking of this saying, well, I really don't want to do print on demand, I really kind of like what I'm doing now, but I like the ordering piece of this, then this will work well for you. And John is now going to walk through that process.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So I think what I'll do is just show you some screen captures of how it looks, and I think that's relevant because, or what I'll start with is sort of how it looks similar to the process that's happening now. So this is an Edelweiss screen where you can see over on the right, there's a little download button. If somebody has the ability to request a print review copy, and as we talked about before, and I'll show you the screen after this, this is not something that is there for the 100,000 registered Edelweiss users, the bloggers, that type of thing. It's something that the sales reps, the publicists can explicitly grant access to. So I was just down at Book People, the bookstore in Austin 2 days ago, and they were talking about how they have all of their staff on Edelweiss, and some of them download digital, some don't download digital, they like reading paper. So this fits into that flow for them, where theoretically in this example here, if there is a digital copy available, maybe they've been whitelisted by the publisher, which means they can download whatever they want. Maybe they were explicitly granted access to this title, or they made a request and it was approved, they could download it. But if there's a print review copy available, and Book People in this example has been given access to request, they would see that little blue button as well over on the right. Here's just quickly, this is our contact page where reps and publicists can go in now and manage their contact lists. You'll see the little shaded area there where there's an additional option for publishers that sign up with this program for me, in this case, to be able to request those print galley titles. So if that is not selected, then I would not have seen that little blue button on the previous screen. But if it is, then I would be able to go in and request that title. So I can do this either at the contact level, or I can do it at the account level. So I could go in for a bookstore and say all of the active Book People users can request our print review copies there. Doesn't mean that it just ships to them. It's a request that comes in similar to the current process again for digital copies. So this is a publisher view, and if you've used the digital review copy process as a publisher, this looks familiar to you, slightly different, but it's very similar to the digital review copy approval process. So instead of just sort of the simple approve, though, there are a few additional fields there where there's the shipping, which the user puts in, so we can ship it right to their address. And then there are a couple different options to either ship it right away. Again, in the current model that Joe talked about that we're starting with, that would send a file right to Ingram Lightning Source and ship it, or you can add that to a cart and sort of batch the orders or decline it. But the workflow, again, is similar to how whoever is doing that at your publishing house is doing it now for the digital review copies. So it reduces that learning curve. On the user side, same type of thing. So if I come in and in that example before where I had the blue bar and the green bar, the screenshot that you see on the left there is essentially what is the current digital review copy request process, where there's just the ability to essentially choose your format. So you can, instead of just always downloading digital, if I'm somebody who has the permission to do so, I can request the print copy. Before I do that, I have to input my shipping information, which could either be the store or the library or a personal address as well. That's something that when it's approved, it can be changed. So the rep could change that if they want. But again, it's sort of part of the benefit of this whole thing is making or allowing the people who want to read that book to be able to directly request it and better make sure that it gets to the people that you want to. We've heard, a good number of times from especially booksellers that they get a box of 20 review copies, and even the ones that are organized on Edelweiss go through and sort of say, well, three folks have put in that they're interested, but that's about it. So what happens to the rest of those? They oftentimes just sit in the buyer's office and may or may not get read. There's also the ability for, and sorry for the little fuzzy screenshot here, for the reps or publicists to go in and do this themselves. So I've showed you more the ability for the end user to request, but there's certainly the ability for a rep when they're at the appointment or beforehand when they're in the hotel or wherever they may be, to go in and say, I want to send a PRC to these folks at, whether it's the buyer or the science fiction enthusiast at Book People, to be able to go in and do that themselves, sort of the push as opposed to the pull. And then they can go in as well and kind of track their orders and see where it is in the process. And again, this is, in the case of the Ingram print on demand, we get back the status and can track that through till the end. So when the order is placed, either as a single send or as a batched order, according to the specs of either the printer or the back office or the warehouse, those are sent along, and then there's the traditional, as you'd expect, communication process of where those PRCs are in the process until they get shipped. So a little more on the details, and Joe, you can chime in if you want. For publishers who are already using the digital review copy, there's no additional fee for this. So it's something that's included in there. There's a small fee for publishers who aren't engaged with Edelweiss on that. And then Joe mentioned there's a small transaction fee. It's actually $1.50 is what we're starting with, that we add on per title. So it's completely variable. And
sorry, just to clarify, it's $1.50 per unit.
Per unit.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yes, thanks, Joe. So it's completely variable, and I think part of that is, it's very low risk, and again, really no upfront investment to try this out.
So just on that last point, so if you have your digital review copy, if you're using that service in Edelweiss, you're already paying a fee for that service. It will cost you nothing to add print review copies into that module. You only pay for the print review copy service when books are ordered and shipped somewhere, and it's $1.50 per unit.
Yeah, and let me, go back to this slide. And just one point on that, Joe talked about this in the beginning, is we really are that ordering front end. In the case of, let's say you were going to do it through our starting partner Ingram on this, you would negotiate and contract directly with Ingram for the actual printing costs of that, the same way if it came from your warehouse. We're really providing that front end to be able to manage the requests that come through and the proactive orders that reps and publicists and whoever else may create.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So that's it.
So now I'll get there. So yeah.
Any questions, Sarah, from the throngs?
We had one question come in about Publicist, I think is what we're getting at, is sort of people who are interested in one particular title and kind of how they could manage their print review copies for just that title and kind of see the status for that. Do you want to talk to that a little bit?
See the status for, so we've got a lot of reporting, if that's kind of the question, where we're obviously able to track, and we do this for the digital review copies, where you can go back and see how many did we, for the case of the DRCs, how many were requested, how many were downloaded, that type of thing, if that's the question.
Yeah, I think it was getting at being able to track, the number that went out for just that title, which sounds like it's part of that.
Yep, that's exactly right. And again, there's control on this, and we're aware that it's different for digital. There really is no variable incremental cost. I mean, if the user downloads it to an Adobe Digital Editions type of machine, then it's 8 cents or 22%, but that's pretty small. So we know that there's a bigger cost, obviously, for each one of these. So you have complete control over the approval. So even if you grant access to somebody, you can take that request and still send an email saying, we don't have enough of these, or, whatever it might be. But yes, we have that reporting out to show sort of what you approved and what your folks shipped.
Here we have another question come in right now. Well, are you aware of any industry preferences of when a print review copy might be preferred over a digital ARC? Not so much related to the process so much, but sort of what have you heard when you're talking to people about how they use those two differently, maybe?
Well, I think so our understanding in the conversations that we have had, publishers would love to move towards digital review copies because it's just it's much less expensive for them. But there's still a strong preference for folks to read a printed copy. And
in some segments, I would say. I think for bookstores, there definitely are some who jumped on the digital review copy bandwagon, but there are still a good number of people. I almost think it's kind of a binary thing. There are people who are okay with digital review copies, and there are people who are not and want the old print review copy.
Yeah, I think that's right. So there's not really I think as far as we're aware, a best practice that, well, in this case or for this genre or what have you, you want to use print review copies versus digital copies. It's really, I think, a sense of interest amongst the people that you want to get the review copies in front of.
I think that, the only sort of segmenting there is, I think, I from what I've seen, the blogger community is maybe a little happier just to get the copies. So they're okay with digital. They may be a little more sort of open to digital anyway, live in sort of that space a little bit more. Whereas, I think what we're hearing from publishers, the bookstores have so many options. They get so many of these anyway, that you have to go a little bit more towards what they prefer if you want them to read it.
Right. And I think So just sorry, I don't want to take us off into the weeds too far, but so to that question about kind of industry practices, or one of the things, so in our conversations, one of the things we heard is the idea that because they can use this program to monitor who's getting the books, and then the publisher can use that data, they can follow up, say, well, so-and-so on the floor who's the science fiction aficionado, got this science fiction title, they'll follow up with that person. So they felt that they could do a better job of actually tracking marketing opportunities and capitalizing on them through this program. The other thing I'll throw in there is that we've heard is the idea that this is not an all or nothing program. People can use it for all sorts of purposes. You can use just the print-on-demand piece for the kind of the end of the life cycle of an advanced review copy. You can use it for your whole program. You can use it just for reps who, for their purposes. You can really use it however you want without a lot of without incremental cost.
Yeah.
And so I think that's another positive thing that we've heard.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Joe and John. I see a couple more questions. I'm just going to follow up with some individual clarifications. So if we didn't get to your question, I will reach out to you or answer it right now. But thank you. This is actually, you mentioned earlier, we're super excited about this, and also how positively it's been, just embraced by the folks who've heard about it so far. So it seems like a great process and a win for publishers in terms of efficiency, but also cost for sure. So thanks again. And if folks have questions, definitely reach out to us. You can also find it on the website, but our email, you can reach all of us at sales@abovethetreeline.com. Thanks all.